The night glittered with gold and champagne. Inside Daniel Carter's mansion, chandeliers sparkled above a sea of gowns and tuxedos. The gala was meant to show power, wealth, and prestige. Every camera in Los Angeles wanted a shot of the CEO and his glowing family. At the center of it all stood Emily Carter, 9 months pregnant, her hands resting protectively on her round belly. She smiled politely, but behind that smile was exhaustion, swelling feet, and the fear that tonight might be more than she could endure. Emily had begged to stay home. Her doctor had warned her to rest, but Daniel insisted. He wanted the perfect image: a successful businessman, his beautiful wife, and their soon-to-be child. It was the picture of prosperity. Yet Daniel's hand on her back was not warm or tender. It was firm, cold, almost like he was guiding a stranger. Emily felt like a prop, not a partner. The hall buzzed with laughter, glasses clinking, and jazz music floating through the air. But for Emily, every step was heavy, every breath shallow. She kept whispering to the baby inside her, "Hold on, we just have to get through tonight." Her heart knew something was wrong. Daniel's charm was too forced, his glances too distracted. And then she saw her, the woman in the red dress, Rain. Supposedly a business partner, but Emily had already seen the late-night messages, the secret meetings. She knew what Rain really was. Still, Emily stood tall. She couldn't let the whisper start now. She couldn't collapse in front of these people who only saw her as Daniel's accessory. She straightened her shoulders, telling herself that soon she would expose the truth. Daniel raised his glass to make a toast. His smile widened, but his eyes were sharp as knives. To growth, to loyalty, and to the future of Carter Enterprises. Applause erupted, filling the room. Emily clapped faintly, her palms damp. Michael Carter, Daniel's older brother and the county sheriff, stood near the edge of the crowd. He didn't drink. He didn't cheer. He simply watched, his gaze lingering on Emily as if he could sense the storm brewing. Then came the call for a family photo. The MC invited Daniel and Emily to the staircase at the center of the hall. Cameras flashed as they walked together, Daniel pulling Emily by the elbow. The polished wooden steps gleamed under the lights, and guests turned to capture the perfect shot. Emily's chest tightened, the baby kicked hard, as if warning her. She inhaled, ready to speak, to finally confront her husband and reveal the betrayal she'd been holding inside. But before a single word left her mouth, she felt Daniel's grip tighten. His hand pressed against her arm, not supportive but crushing. In a split second, the world tilted. The sound of laughter fractured into screams. Glass shattered. Emily's body pitched forward, the hem of her gown flaring like a wave. Guests gasped in horror as she tumbled down the stairs, her belly hitting the edge of a step with a sickening thud. The music stopped. Blood began to stain the polished floor. Emily's eyes fluttered, her breath shallow. She whispered one word, "Baby," before darkness swallowed her. And as chaos erupted in the hall, no one could believe what they had just seen. Emily Carter had not been born into luxury. She grew up in a small town in Ohio, the daughter of a mechanic and a waitress. Her childhood was modest, but filled with warmth. She had dreams of teaching, of shaping young minds, of building a quiet life filled with love. When she earned her teaching degree, she was proud, even though she carried student debt and worked extra jobs to get by. She believed hard work and kindness could build a better future. That belief was what drew her to Daniel Carter. Years ago, when they met at a charity event, he wasn't yet the powerful CEO. He was ambitious, charming, and full of promises. He told Emily she was different from the shallow people in his social circle. He admired her simplicity, her gentle spirit. She believed him, and in those early days, his attention felt like sunlight. He sent flowers, held her hand like it was precious, and talked about building a life together. When Daniel proposed, Emily thought she had found her fairy tale. Their wedding was lavish, paid for by his rising fortune, but Emily didn't care about the money. She cared about the vows, the whispered forever under the altar lights. She quit her teaching job when Daniel convinced her she didn't need to work. "Your job is to be safe, to prepare for our family," he had said, sliding a diamond ring on her finger. At first, Emily believed him. She decorated their home, cooked his favorite meals, and dreamed of the day she'd become a mother. She thought she was living the dream, but soon cracks began to show. Daniel worked late nights, often unreachable. His temper grew sharper. He criticized her clothes, her weight, her lack of sophistication. Emily began to feel small inside the mansion's marble walls. Still, she stayed loyal. She carried the hope that motherhood would change everything, that when their child arrived, Daniel would soften, that love would return. The pregnancy had been difficult, morning sickness, swollen ankles, sleepless nights, but Emily endured it all. She would rub her belly, whispering to the baby, "You're worth every sacrifice." Yet, as her belly grew, Daniel grew more distant. He stopped attending doctor's appointments. He barely touched her hand. He canceled dinner plans and replaced them with business meetings. Emily suspected the truth but didn't want to face it. She kept telling herself, "He's stressed. He just needs time." Behind her soft smile was silent suffering. She cried in the shower so no one would hear. She folded tiny baby clothes alone at night. She carried the weight of love and betrayal at the same time. Friends stopped visiting, intimidated by Daniel's cold presence. Her parents rarely came, sensing the tension but unsure how to help. Emily's world shrank until it was just her and the baby inside her. And yet, despite the loneliness, Emily's spirit held a quiet strength. She was not weak. She was a woman holding on to dignity, clinging to hope, and silently preparing for the storm she felt coming. She knew love had betrayed her, but she also knew, deep inside, that truth could never stay hidden forever. And on the night of the gala, that truth was about to explode in front of everyone. The Carter mansion was alive with extravagance. Strings of white lights curled around the marble pillars, while crystal chandeliers spilled golden rain across the polished floors. A live jazz band played in the corner, their trumpets and saxophones rising above the hum of 100 conversations. The air smelled of roses, expensive perfume, and roasted lamb from the lavish buffet. It wasn't just a party. It was Daniel Carter's stage to prove that he was not only a CEO, but also a king of influence. Luxury cars lined the driveway. Photographers swarmed the entrance, capturing celebrities, investors, and politicians. Everyone wanted to be seen at Daniel's year-end gala. It was the event of the season, where alliances were formed with a handshake and fortunes shifted with a whispered deal. Guests held crystal glasses filled with champagne, their diamonds glittering under the light as they mingled and laughed. At the center of it all, Daniel thrived. He moved with effortless confidence, shaking hands, throwing his head back in rehearsed laughter. His smile was practiced, his compliments smooth. He was the star, the man everyone wanted to impress. To outsiders, he was flawless. But Emily knew better. She saw the cracks hidden behind the charm, the impatience, the selfishness, the hunger for more. Emily stood near his side, dressed in a dark blue gown that flowed around her swollen belly. She leaned slightly on the railing, her back aching from the weight of carrying life inside her. Every few minutes, someone stopped to congratulate her, commenting on how radiant she looked. She smiled, but her eyes were heavy, the strain clear to anyone who cared enough to notice. Few did. To them, she was simply Daniel's wife, an accessory to his empire. Sheriff Michael Carter arrived quietly, unnoticed by most. Unlike the others, he didn't wear arrogance on his sleeve. His suit was simple, his expression measured. He carried himself with the quiet authority of a man who had seen too much of the world to be dazzled by chandeliers. As his gaze swept across the room, he noticed Emily. She looked tired, pale, but she forced a smile when their eyes met. Something in his gut tightened. He didn't know why, but instinct told him that this night would not end as planned. The evening pressed on with speeches and music. Laughter rippled across the room, wine bottles emptied, and the band played faster. Yet under the glamour, tension pulsed. Rain, dressed in scarlet silk, drifted near Daniel like a shadow disguised as fire. She touched his arm, whispered into his ear, laughed too sweetly. Emily noticed. So did Michael. But Daniel didn't care who saw. His arrogance blinded him, convinced that his image was untouchable. The MC tapped the microphone, asking for silence. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, "before we continue, we would like a photograph of the Carter family, a symbol of success and unity." Applause echoed. Daniel grinned, reaching for Emily's arm. She hesitated, her breath shallow, but the eyes of the room left her no choice. Together, they began climbing the grand staircase at the heart of the mansion. Cameras flashed wildly, illuminating their path. The steps gleamed like mirrors under the chandelier light. Emily gripped the railing, her heart pounding, her stomach tightening with another kick from the baby. Every click of the camera felt like a countdown. And as the applause roared, Emily sensed that the glittering night was about to shatter. The staircase sparkled under the flash of cameras, but Emily's vision blurred. Her pulse thudded in her ears, faster than the rhythm of the jazz band below. Daniel's hand gripped her arm, guiding her toward the top step where the chandelier bathed them in golden light. To the guests, it looked like a perfect picture. The powerful CEO, his glowing wife, and their unborn child. But Emily felt the truth pressing against her chest like a weight she could no longer carry. She couldn't pretend any longer. As the MC raised his hand to cue the photographers, Emily's lips parted. Her voice trembled but carried through the hush of the hall. "Daniel," she said, loud enough for the first rows to hear, "should we tell them the truth? Should we tell them about Rain?" The room froze. Laughter died mid-breath. Champagne glasses paused in midair. Guests shifted uncomfortably, eyes darting from Daniel to the woman in red silk standing near the buffet. Rain's painted smile faltered, her fingers clutching her clutch tighter. Daniel's grip on Emily's arm tightened painfully. He leaned toward her, his teeth clenched, whispering through a forced smile, "Not here! Don't you dare ruin this night." But Emily didn't stop. Months of silence, of humiliation, of swallowing her tears boiled over. Her voice grew steadier. "You tell them about loyalty in your speeches, but you don't even know what loyalty means. You lied to me, to our family, to everyone here." Gasps rippled through the hall. Some guests whispered, others stared at Rain, who now looked exposed, her cheeks flaming. Michael Carter, standing near the back, felt his jaw tighten. He had suspected Daniel's infidelity, but to hear Emily's voice crack with betrayal hit him deeper than he expected. Daniel tried to laugh it off, raising his glass as though it were a joke. "My wife is emotional. Pregnancy, you know how it is." He forced a chuckle, but the sound was brittle. His attempt to dismiss her only fueled Emily's fire. Her eyes glistened with tears as she stepped 1 inch away from his hold. "Don't you dare use this baby as your excuse. I'm not crazy. I'm not delusional. Everyone in this room deserves to know who you really are." Murmurs grew louder. A board member whispered, "Did you hear what she said?" Another muttered, "If this is true, Carter's reputation is finished." The once celebratory air thickened with scandal. Daniel's mask cracked, his jaw clenched, his face flushed with anger. He turned his body slightly, blocking Emily from the crowd, and hissed, "You're making a fool of yourself. Stop now." But Emily lifted her chin, her voice breaking yet strong. "No, Daniel. Tonight I won't be silent." Every camera pointed at them, every pair of eyes fixed on the couple. The perfect image Daniel had built was crumbling before him. His empire, his pride, his carefully curated reputation, it was all unraveling because of the woman he had underestimated. Daniel's hand twitched, his fingers digging into Emily's elbow. For the first time, the mask slipped completely, and what lay beneath was not charm but fury. His breathing grew heavy, his chest rising and falling like a man cornered. Michael pushed through the crowd, sensing the shift. His instincts screamed danger, but the distance between him and the staircase felt like miles. Emily, still trembling but unyielding, took a deep breath. She opened her mouth to deliver the words that would end Daniel's facade forever. But before she could speak, Daniel made a move that no one in the room could have imagined. Time slowed, every second stretching like glass about to shatter. Emily's chest rose as she gathered breath for the words that would burn Daniel's lies to ash. Her lips trembled, her voice ready to pierce the glittering illusion he had built. But before she could release a single syllable, Daniel's mask cracked into something darker, something raw and violent. His smile twisted into a grimace. In one swift motion, his hand pressed harder into her elbow, then to her shoulder. It looked, to an outsider, like a guiding gesture, but those close enough could see the force. The way his knuckles whitened, the way Emily's body tilted dangerously toward the staircase edge. "Daniel!" Emily gasped, her heels scraping against the polished wood as she tried to steady herself. Gasps erupted from the crowd below. The MC froze, microphone hanging limp in his hand. Michael Carter's eyes widened, his instincts firing like a gunshot. He shoved through the sea of stunned guests, yelling, "Stop!" But his voice was swallowed by the chaos. Daniel's face burned crimson, rage clouding his judgment. For him, it wasn't just about silencing Emily. It was about control, pride, the desperate need to maintain his spotless image. And in front of 100 witnesses, he made the most reckless decision of his life. With a violent shove, he pushed Emily forward. The sound of her body striking the steps echoed louder than the music ever had. Her blue gown flared out as she tumbled, the shimmer of satin twisting in the light. A collective scream tore through the room. Crystal glasses shattered as guests dropped them in shock. Emily's head struck the lower step, and crimson spread across the polished wood. "Emily!" a woman shrieked. Blood poured from her leg, soaking into the fabric of her dress. Her swollen belly shifted unnaturally as her body rolled to a stop at the bottom of the staircase. For one heart-stopping moment, there was silence. Then came the chaos. Guests rushed forward, some crying, others covering their mouths in horror. Michael barreled through, his hands pushing people aside until he dropped to his knees beside her. His pulse hammered as he touched her neck, searching desperately for a sign of life. "She's breathing," he shouted, though her breaths were faint, shallow, like whispers against the storm. Emily's eyelids fluttered weakly. She mouthed a single word, "Baby," before her head lolled to the side. Her face was pale, lips tinged blue. The blood pooling beneath her painted a horrific contrast against the white marble floor. Panic erupted. Someone screamed for an ambulance. Guests pulled out their phones, calling 911, their trembling voices echoing through the hall. The band stopped playing. The trumpet lay abandoned on the floor. Above them all, Daniel stood frozen. His chest heaved, sweat dripping down his temple. He looked down at the destruction he caused, then up at the crowd, dozens of horrified faces staring back at him. His empire of charm collapsed in an instant. Rain stumbled forward, her face pale. "Daniel, what have you done?" she whispered, her voice shaking. But Daniel didn't answer. His eyes darted wildly, searching for a way out, as if he could still escape what everyone had just witnessed. Sirens wailed faintly in the distance. Michael clenched Emily's hand, his voice low but firm. "Stay with me, Emily. Don't let go. We'll save you. I swear." Blood spread wider across the marble floor, and the once celebratory hall transformed into a crime scene. And as the ambulance raced closer, Daniel realized there was no undoing the horror that had just unfolded. Screams echoed through the mansion as the glittering gala dissolved into pandemonium. Guests scattered across the marble floor, their designer heels slipping on spilled wine and shattered glass. The scent of blood mixed with perfume and champagne, thick and nauseating. Some guests wept openly. Others whispered furiously, already recording the scene on their phones. The grandeur of the night was gone. In its place was terror. Michael knelt beside Emily, pressing his jacket against her bleeding leg. His hands shook, but his voice stayed steady. "Stay with me. Stay awake," he urged. Emily's breaths rattled shallowly, her eyelids fluttering but refusing to open fully. Her skin was pale, almost translucent under the harsh chandelier light. "Call 911!" someone yelled again, though multiple phones were already dialing. Within minutes, the wail of sirens grew louder, closer. Red and blue lights began to flicker outside the grand windows, washing over the stunned faces of the crowd. Daniel finally descended a few steps, his expression contorted into something resembling concern. "Move back. Give her air," he barked, but his voice cracked. His performance lacked sincerity. The sweat beading on his forehead wasn't from grief, it was from fear. "Don't touch her," Michael snapped, glaring up at his brother. "You've done enough." For a split second, their eyes locked. Daniel's gaze was desperate, begging Michael not to say more. But Michael's jaw was stone. He had seen hundreds of violent incidents in his career, and this was no accident. Paramedics burst through the door, pushing a gurney, their voices sharp and controlled. "Step aside. Give us space." They knelt beside Emily, cutting through the fabric of her dress to reach her injuries. One checked her pulse, another applied pressure to her abdomen. "She's losing a lot of blood," one medic muttered. "Get her on oxygen," another ordered. A mask was strapped over Emily's face, and her chest rose weakly under the flow of air. Guests covered their mouths, horrified at the sight of the young woman barely clinging to life. The woman in red, Rain, stood paralyzed near the buffet, her glass slipping from her hand and crashing to the floor. Her face was ghostly pale. "Is she going to make it?" a guest whispered. "Shh," another replied. She's 9 months pregnant. The baby, oh God. The paramedics lifted Emily onto the gurney, her limp hand falling off the side until Michael caught it. He squeezed firmly. "Emily, you're not alone. I'll be right behind you," he whispered, his throat tight. Daniel rushed down the stairs, trying to regain control. "I'll ride with her," he insisted, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "I'm her husband. She needs me." But Michael stepped between them, his frame blocking Daniel's path. "Not tonight," he growled, his sheriff's badge glinting under the lights. "You're not going anywhere near her until I get answers." The room gasped. A ripple of whispers surged as people realized what Michael had just implied. Daniel's carefully crafted image had cracked wide open, and witnesses had seen enough to question everything. As the paramedics wheeled Emily toward the flashing lights outside, Daniel's fists clenched at his sides. Rage and fear battled in his eyes. His empire, his secrets, his control, they were slipping through his fingers. And while Emily fought for her life in the ambulance, Daniel began to realize his brother might be the greatest threat he had ever faced. The ambulance tore through the Los Angeles streets, its siren wailing like a desperate cry. Inside, Emily lay strapped to the gurney, her body pale and trembling. The oxygen mask covered half her face, fogging with each shallow breath. A medic pressed against her abdomen, shouting vitals into the radio. "Mother critical, severe blood loss, baby's heart rate unstable." Michael sat hunched beside her, his large hand gripping hers tightly. His badge was still pinned to his chest, but tonight he wasn't just a sheriff, he was family. His throat burned as he whispered, "You hold on, Emily. Your little one needs you. I promise, I won't let him get away with this." He had seen victims before, but never had he felt this hollow ache in his chest. He wasn't just fighting for justice anymore. He was fighting for her life. Behind them, Daniel was pacing in the hospital's emergency waiting room. He had not been allowed inside the ambulance. Michael had made sure of that. But his fury hadn't cooled. He barked at the receptionist, demanding updates, trying to play the role of worried husband, but his act felt forced. Sweat clung to his collar, and his eyes darted nervously to the crowd of reporters who had already gathered outside the sliding doors. Cameras flashed, microphones stretched, questions pierced the air. "Mr. Carter, did you push your wife? Was this a domestic dispute? Is it true the sheriff was at the gala?" Daniel forced a practiced scowl. "My wife slipped," he insisted. "She's clumsy in her condition. Stop twisting this into something it isn't." His words sounded hollow, even to himself. The whispers around him grew louder, the image of the untouchable CEO slipping with every headline that would hit the news before morning. Meanwhile, in the operating room, chaos reigned. Surgeons worked quickly, hands moving with precision, voices overlapping. "BP dropping," one nurse shouted. Another called, "We're losing fetal heartbeat." The monitor beeped erratically, filling the room with urgency. Emily drifted between darkness and faint flashes of light. She heard muffled voices, felt the cold metal against her skin, the tug of machines keeping her alive. In her haze, she clung to one thought, the tiny life inside her. She whispered faintly, even as her consciousness slipped, "Please, my baby." Outside the ER doors, Michael stood rigid, fists clenched at his sides. Every second dragged like an hour. He could hear the faint clatter of instruments, the sharp orders through the walls. He prayed silently, though he wasn't a praying man. "Don't take her. Don't take the child. Not like this." A nurse finally burst through the doors, her scrubs stained. "We need blood donors." "O negative," she shouted. Michael stepped forward instantly. "Take mine," he said without hesitation. Minutes later, he sat in a chair, the needle draining life from him to give to Emily. He clenched his jaw, forcing himself to stay strong. Back in the waiting area, Daniel slumped into a chair, trembling hands covering his face. For the first time, fear swallowed his arrogance. What if she survived? What if she told the truth? His empire wasn't just cracking, it was about to collapse. Inside the operating room, a faint cry pierced the tension. A nurse shouted, "We've got the baby." Heartbeat is weak but present. Relief surged through the team, but Emily's monitors still dipped dangerously low. The battle wasn't over, and as the doctors fought to keep Emily alive, the war between truth and lies grew fiercer outside those sterile walls. The hospital waiting room was a storm of whispers and flashing lights. Reporters had crowded against the glass doors, their cameras relentless. Security tried to push them back, but the questions only grew sharper. Did you push her? Was it jealousy? Why did witnesses say they saw you shove her? The words cut through the sterile air like blades. Daniel sat rigid in a chair, jaw clenched, sweat dampening his collar. Every eye in the room seemed to burn into him. His empire had been built on charm and control, but tonight both were slipping from his grasp. He pulled out his phone, dialing furiously. "Get ahead of this story," he barked at his publicist. "Spin it. Make it sound like an accident. Emily fainted. Do you hear me? She fainted." His hand trembled as he ended the call. He had always believed money could erase problems, but this time the problem had bled out in front of an entire room of witnesses. His stomach churned. If Emily survived and spoke, no amount of wealth could silence her truth. Rain paced across the waiting room, her heels clicking against the tile. The red silk of her dress now felt like a target, as though everyone could see the guilt stitched into its seams. She wrung her hands, her eyes darting nervously to the reporters. Her glamorous mask had slipped, beneath it was pure fear. "Daniel," she hissed, leaning close, "this is spiraling out of control. People saw what happened. They're saying you tried to kill her. Do you realize what that means for me?" "For us?" Daniel's eyes flared. "For you?" he snapped, keeping his voice low but venomous. "This isn't about you, Rain. Do you understand what I stand to lose? Everything. The company, the board, my name. Gone." Her face twisted with panic. "And what about me? Do you think the press won't drag me through the mud? They'll call me the homewrecker, the mistress, the woman who stood by while a pregnant wife almost died. Daniel, this is a disaster." For the first time, Rain saw the desperation in his eyes, the wild calculation of a man trapped. He wasn't protecting her, or even himself. He was scrambling like a drowning man clutching at broken wood, and for the first time she realized he might take her down with him. Across the room, Michael returned from the blood bank, his sleeve rolled up, a bandage on his arm. His eyes swept the chaos, landing on Daniel and Rain. He had seen that closeness before, the too familiar body language. His jaw tightened. "So it's true," he muttered under his breath. Michael's mind spun. Witnesses had already spoken to him privately, guests whispering about Daniel's temper, about the moment on the staircase when his hand shoved instead of steadied. Combined with what he saw with his own eyes, the story was piecing itself together. And Rain's frantic demeanor only confirmed it. The ER doors swung open suddenly. A doctor stepped out, his face grave. "She's alive," he announced. Relief rippled through the waiting room, but then his voice dropped. "She's critical. We've managed to stabilize the baby for now, but both lives hang in the balance." Rain let out a shaky breath while Daniel pressed his face into his hands. For a brief moment, the room was silent except for the beeping monitors from inside. Michael's eyes stayed fixed on his brother. Every instinct screamed that this wasn't just an accident, and he would not let it be buried. And as Daniel tried to plot his next move, Michael silently vowed to uncover the truth, no matter how deep the lies ran. The ICU was dim, the only light coming from the steady glow of machines that kept Emily tethered to life. Tubes ran from her arms, monitors beeped in rhythm with her fragile heartbeat, and the faint hiss of oxygen filled the room. For hours she had been motionless, trapped in the shadows of unconsciousness. Nurses whispered at the doorway, exchanging updates in hushed tones. Michael sat at her bedside, shoulders heavy with exhaustion. His uniform jacket hung over the chair, his badge glinting faintly under the fluorescent light. He had stayed there since she was wheeled out of surgery, refusing to leave her side. His hand rested on hers, his thumb brushing the back of her knuckles as though willing her to come back. Then at last her fingers twitched. Michael sat upright. "Emily, can you hear me?" His voice cracked with relief and urgency. Her eyelids fluttered weakly, lashes trembling before her eyes opened, hazy and unfocused. She blinked, the world around her blurred by tears and medication. Her lips parted, a faint whisper escaping. "Where, baby?" Michael leaned closer. "The baby's here. Weak, but alive. The doctors are fighting for both of you. You're safe now." Tears slipped from the corners of Emily's eyes, rolling down her pale cheeks. She tried to lift her hand to her stomach, but the IV restrained her. The memory of the staircase flashed like lightning, Daniel's grip, the violent shove, the sickening tumble. Her chest tightened, and she began to shake. Michael gripped her hand firmly. Emily, breathe. You don't need to force yourself, not yet. But Emily's voice, though hoarse, pushed through. He pushed me. The words were barely audible, but they struck Michael like a thunderclap. He froze, his jaw clenching, his eyes burning. Emily, are you certain? He asked softly, though he already knew the answer. She nodded weakly, tears spilling faster. He looked at me, like I was nothing, then he pushed me, in front of everyone. Michael's heart ached. Part of him had hoped it was an accident, that somehow his brother wasn't capable of such cruelty. But hearing the truth from Emily's trembling lips ended any doubt. Daniel hadn't just betrayed his wife, he had endangered his own child. Outside the glass door, Daniel lingered, his eyes scanning the monitors. He had been allowed a few moments inside earlier, but Emily had been unconscious then. Now, the sight of her awake made sweat bead on his forehead. If she spoke, if she told anyone what happened, his world would collapse. He turned to the doctor. When can I see her again? She's my wife. She needs me. His voice was sharp, impatient. But Michael stepped into the hallway, blocking the door. His presence was solid, immovable. Not tonight, he said coldly. She needs peace, not pressure. Daniel's eyes narrowed, but he forced a smile for the passing nurses. He couldn't explode here, not with so many witnesses. Still, his thoughts raced. If Emily spoke publicly, the board, the investors, the police, everything would crumble. Inside the ICU, Emily's eyes fluttered shut again, drained by the effort. But she had spoken the truth, and Michael had heard it. He squeezed her hand gently, his voice low and steady. Rest now, I'll protect you. I'll protect your baby. He won't get away with this. Outside, Daniel's shadow lingered by the window, his fists clenching in silent fury. And though Emily was barely holding on, her awakening had set in motion a chain of events that would destroy Daniel's carefully built empire. Morning broke over Los Angeles, gray clouds hanging heavy above the city. At the hospital, reporters swarmed like vultures, their microphones raised, cameras flashing. Headlines were already spreading. CEO's wife fights for life after gala fall. But inside the ICU, the truth was more sinister. And Michael Carter knew it. Emily slept restlessly, her breath shallow, her body weak from blood loss. Michael stood at the foot of her bed, his eyes steady but burning with resolve. Her faint words echoed in his mind. He pushed me. That was no longer suspicion. That was testimony. And as sheriff, Michael would not ignore it, even if the suspect was his own brother. He left the ICU and walked into the cold hallway, his boots heavy against the tile. He pulled out his notebook and began listing names, witnesses, guests who had seen too much, heard too much, whispered too much. He would start piecing the story together, brick by brick, until no lie could stand. The first call he made was to the MC. The man's voice shook when he answered. Sheriff Carter, I didn't want to get involved, but yes, I saw his hand. He didn't steady her. He shoved her. Michael's grip tightened on the phone. Write it down. I'll need your statement. Next was the waiter who had been near the staircase. The young man stammered, terrified of losing his job, but finally confessed. I heard Mrs. Carter say his mistress's name. He looked furious. Then he pushed her. Everyone saw. Every statement was another nail in Daniel's coffin. Meanwhile, across town, Daniel sat in his penthouse office, staring at the city skyline. His lawyer paced the floor, listing options. We say she slipped. We pay off the staff. We silence the tabloids. This can still be contained. But Daniel's hands shook as he lit another cigar. It can't leak. If Emily talks, I'm finished. Rain sat in the corner, pale and jittery. She hadn't slept, haunted by the image of Emily's blood spilling across the marble floor. People are already talking, Daniel. You can't bury this. Michael won't let it go. At the sound of his brother's name, Daniel's jaw clenched. Michael was the one variable he couldn't control. Money could buy silence from strangers, but not from family. Back at the hospital, Michael walked the corridors, interviewing shaken guests who had remained after the chaos. Each voice confirmed the same story: Daniel's rage, Emily's confrontation, the push. Piece by piece, the truth formed into an unshakable chain of evidence. He returned to Emily's room, standing quietly at her side. Her fragile form stirred as though she could sense his presence. Rest, he whispered. Justice is coming. Then his phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number lit up the screen. Meet me. I have proof. Attached was a grainy still image from a phone camera. Daniel's hand extended against Emily's shoulder, her body tipping forward. Michael's heart pounded. Witness statements were strong, but this was undeniable. Proof that no lawyer could spin. He slipped the phone back into his pocket, his decision firm. The investigation wasn't just beginning, it was accelerating. And while Daniel schemed in his tower of glass, he had no idea that the truth was already marching toward him, relentless and unstoppable. Daniel's office was a fortress of glass and steel, high above the city that once admired him. Now, it felt like a cage. The headlines blared on every screen. CEO's wife critical after gala incident. His PR team had worked overnight, spinning the story as an unfortunate accident, but the whispers were louder than the press releases. People had seen too much. Daniel slammed his fist against the desk. "I want this gone." He roared at his lawyer. "Erase the witnesses, shut down the tabloids, bury the gossip. I don't care how much it costs." The lawyer adjusted his glasses nervously. "Money can't erase what happened in front of 100 people, Daniel. We can pay off a few, but the sheriff, your brother, he won't bend. He's already gathering statements." Daniel's jaw clenched. Michael had always been a thorn, the righteous older brother who never understood ambition. Now he wasn't just a nuisance, he was an enemy. He turned to his assistant, sliding a thick envelope across the desk. "Find that waiter. The one near the staircase. Give him this. If he doesn't take it, remind him he'll never work in this city again." The assistant nodded, pale and shaken, before hurrying out. Next, Daniel dialed Rain. Her voice quivered when she answered. "Daniel, this is spiraling. I can't sleep, I can't eat. People are calling me." "Shut up," Daniel snapped. "You say nothing. You were never there. If anyone asks, you left early. Do you understand?" "But they saw me with you," she whispered. "They'll drag me into this." "Then deny it," he barked. "Or do you want to lose everything I promised you?" Silence. Then a shaky, "Fine." Daniel leaned back, running a hand through his hair. He still had power. He still had money. He would twist the story until Emily looked unstable, emotional, reckless. No one would believe a pregnant woman over him, the polished CEO who had built an empire. At least that's what he told himself. But his confidence cracked when his phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "We have footage. Pay, or the world sees it." His blood ran cold. He opened the attachment and saw it, a shaky video from a phone, capturing the exact moment his hand shoved Emily. Her gown whipping, her body falling, the gasp of the crowd. Proof. Daniel's chest tightened, rage boiling in his veins. Someone inside that gala was betraying him. Someone had the power to destroy him. He called his lawyer again. "Find out who has that video. Track them. If it leaks, I'm finished." But beneath the fury, fear gnawed at him. Money could buy silence, but it couldn't erase the truth captured on that screen. And worse, Michael might already have it. Daniel poured himself a glass of scotch, his hand trembling as he lifted it to his lips. He stared out at the city, once his kingdom, now a battlefield. He told himself he could still win. He told himself he was untouchable. But deep inside, for the first time, Daniel Carter felt the walls closing in. And while he plotted in the shadows, Michael was already moving pieces that would bring those walls crashing down. The hospital corridors were quiet at dawn, painted in pale light that leaked through narrow windows. Michael Carter walked them with heavy steps, his badge clipped to his belt, his mind racing. Every witness statement pushed the noose tighter around Daniel's neck, but he needed more, something undeniable from inside the hospital itself. As he passed the nurse's station, a young woman in scrubs glanced nervously at him. Her name tag read Nurse Alvarez. She bit her lip, then called softly, "Sheriff, can I speak with you?" Michael stopped, his eyes narrowing. "Of course. Step outside." They walked into a dim alcove near the vending machines. The nurse wrung her hands, her voice hushed, almost trembling. "I don't know if I should be saying this, but it doesn't feel right. What's happening with Mrs. Carter?" Michael leaned closer, his tone calm but firm. "Tell me everything. You're safe with me." Alvarez swallowed hard. When they brought her in, she was bleeding heavily. "We worked as fast as we could, but something else caught my attention. Mr. Carter, your brother, he tried to get into the emergency bay. He wasn't asking about his wife. He was demanding to know if she was conscious. Over and over again. Not once did he ask about the baby." Michael's jaw tightened. He wanted to know if she could talk. The nurse nodded quickly. "Exactly. And when the doctor told him she was still unconscious, he smiled. Just for a second, but I saw it. It chilled me. Michael's hands curled into fists. That detail confirmed what Emily had whispered. Daniel feared her voice more than anything. There's more, Alvarez continued, glancing over her shoulder as if afraid Daniel might appear. When Mrs. Carter finally stirred during the night, she whispered a word. We could barely hear it through the oxygen mask. I leaned close, and she said, "Push." She tried to repeat it, but her heart monitor spiked and she faded again. Michael exhaled sharply, his suspicions hardening into certainty. Emily wasn't just traumatized, she was trying to accuse him, even in her weakest state. The nurse lowered her eyes. I'm scared, Sheriff. Daniel Carter has power. People are saying he'll crush anyone who stands in his way. But I can't stay silent if it means that poor woman and her baby don't get justice. Michael placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. You did the right thing. I'll protect you. Write everything down. Sign it. This will be part of the record. Relief washed over her face, though fear lingered in her eyes. She nodded and hurried off to prepare her statement. Michael remained in the alcove, his pulse hammering. Emily's faint word, the nurse's testimony, the witness accounts, the video clip, it was all converging. His brother wasn't just reckless, he was dangerous. And now Michael had hospital staff on record. He turned back toward the ICU, pausing at the window where Emily lay pale and still, machines beeping steadily at her side. Hold on, he whispered. I'll see this through. For you and for your child. In another wing of the hospital, Daniel was already on his phone, trying to intimidate administrators into silence. But he didn't know that one brave nurse had already tipped the scales. And once Michael gathered all the pieces, Daniel's empire of lies would start to crumble. By mid-afternoon, Los Angeles buzzed like a hive. News vans lined the street outside the hospital, reporters jostling for position. Rumors swirled online, but no one had proof strong enough to drown out Daniel Carter's carefully crafted statement. His PR team had released a press note that morning. Mrs. Carter slipped during the gala. She remains in critical care. Mr. Carter requests privacy during this difficult time. It sounded polished, sympathetic, controlled, until the video leaked. It began quietly, a 30-second clip uploaded anonymously to a social media account with no name, just the caption. This is the truth about what happened at the Carter Gala. Within minutes, it exploded. The footage was shaky, filmed from a phone in the crowd. The angle wasn't perfect, but it was clear enough. Emily, her voice trembling, calling out Rain's name. Daniel gripping her arm. The crowd gasping as his hand shoved against her shoulder. Emily's body tumbling, her gown whipping like a sail as she fell. The sickening impact, the crimson spreading across the marble, the horrified screams of witnesses. By the time the video ended, hashtags were trending worldwide. Justice for Emily. CEO pushed his wife. Carter scandal. In his penthouse, Daniel's phone exploded with calls, texts, and alerts. He watched the clip loop on a news broadcast, his face pale. His empire had always thrived on image, but the image now shown to millions was not of a polished leader. It was of a monster. Rain burst into the room, her eyes wide with panic. It's everywhere, Daniel. Do you hear me? Everyone's seen it. The board, the investors, God, even my parents called me. They know I was there. Daniel hurled a glass against the wall, shards exploding across the floor. Find out who filmed it. I'll bury them. His voice cracked, more desperate than powerful. But Rain only shook her head. You can't bury the internet. It's too late. Her voice broke into a whisper. You've destroyed everything. At the hospital, Michael watched the clip on a nurse's phone. His chest tightened, but his resolve grew stronger. Witness testimony was good, but this was irrefutable. He immediately forwarded the link to the district attorney's office. Open a file, he ordered. Tonight. Inside the ICU, Emily stirred faintly, her body weak but her spirit refusing to yield. A nurse leaned over, whispering gently. Rest, Mrs. Carter. The world has seen what he did. You're not alone anymore. For the first time, even in her haze of pain, Emily's lips curved into the faintest shadow of a smile. The truth was out, and the world finally believed her. Daniel's lawyer rushed into his office, voice frantic. We need to prepare for criminal charges. The video's gone viral. There's no way to explain it away. Daniel sank into his chair, his hands clutching his temples. His kingdom of glass had shattered in one night. The man who thought himself untouchable was now cornered, his lies laid bare before millions. and as the sun set over the city, the weight of justice loomed larger. The world had seen the push, and no amount of money could erase what had been burned into memory. The boardroom of Carter Enterprises had once been Daniel's throne room. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the city's skyline, a testament to his empire. But on this day, the atmosphere was suffocating. Heavy curtains muted the light, and a dozen pairs of eyes bored into him across the long mahogany table. The leaked video played silently on a screen at the far end, looping again and again. Daniel sat at the head of the table, his hands clasped tightly, his knuckles pale. "This is being blown out of proportion," he said, his voice strained but defiant. "My wife was emotional. She stumbled. The video angle is misleading." An older board member, silver-haired and sharp-eyed, leaned forward. "Misleading? The entire world saw you shove her. Do you think we're fools?" His voice cracked like a whip. Another member added, "Our stock dropped 12% overnight. Investors are pulling out. Do you realize what you've done to this company?" Daniel slammed his fist on the table. "I built this company. Without me, Carter Enterprises is nothing. You owe me your loyalty." The room erupted with murmurs, some angry, some disbelieving. Loyalty was a word Daniel had once commanded with ease. Now it sounded hollow, pathetic. Rain sat near the back, invited as a consultant. She shifted uncomfortably under the board's glares. One woman sneered at her. "And who exactly are you, Miss Rain?" The business partner, who seemed very cozy with our CEO while his wife was bleeding out. Rain's face burned crimson. She opened her mouth, but no defense came. Daniel shot to his feet, his chair scraping harshly. "This is a witch hunt. You're all panicking because of a viral video. I will handle it. My wife will recover, and when she does, she'll confirm it was an accident." But then the silver-haired board member slid a folder across the table. "Sheriff Michael Carter delivered these statements this morning. Witness accounts, staff testimonies. Every one of them says the same thing. You pushed her." Daniel's eyes flickered with panic before hardening into rage. "Michael is biased. He's always envied me. He wants to destroy me." The board ignored his protest. The younger executive cleared his throat. "We've already voted. Effective immediately, you are suspended as CEO pending criminal investigation. Control will be transferred to the interim committee." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Daniel's face drained of color. "You can't do this," he hissed. "This company is mine." But the silver-haired man's tone was final. "No, Daniel. This company belongs to its people, its investors, and its reputation, and you've destroyed all three." Silence filled the room as Daniel stood trembling, his empire slipping from his grasp. Rain avoided his eyes, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She had once seen him as untouchable. Now he looked cornered, broken. Daniel stormed out, slamming the door so hard the walls shook. But as he walked down the hall, he felt the weight of betrayal pressing on him. The board had turned. His allies had vanished. And worst of all, he knew Michael was waiting outside the corporate walls, ready to finish what the board had started. For the first time, Daniel realized he wasn't just losing power, he was losing everything. The ICU lights were softer now, casting a pale glow across the room. Machines still hummed steadily, but the frantic alarms of the previous nights had quieted. Emily Carter lay propped up against white pillows, color slowly returning to her cheeks. She looked fragile, but behind her eyes burned something stronger than fear: resolve. Michael sat beside her, his notepad resting on his knee. He had just finished updating her on the board's decision to suspend Daniel. Emily listened in silence, her hand resting protectively on her abdomen. The baby, though premature, had survived the trauma and was being kept in the neonatal unit. Every time Michael mentioned the child's progress, Emily's lips curved into a faint, determined smile. "I thought I'd lost everything," she whispered, her voice raspy but steady. "But if my baby is fighting, then so will I." Michael leaned forward, his voice low. "Emily, the world saw that video. Witnesses have spoken, but the strongest voice will always be yours. Are you ready to give a statement?" She closed her eyes for a moment, recalling the horror of the gala, the golden lights, the stunned faces, Daniel's cold grip before the shove. When she opened them again, tears glistened but did not fall. "Yes, I'll tell them what he did. I'll tell them everything." The decision wasn't easy. Speaking meant reliving every wound, every betrayal. It meant putting herself and her baby in the center of a storm. But Emily no longer cared about protecting Daniel's image. That illusion had almost killed her. A nurse entered quietly with a tray of food, pausing at the doorway. "Mrs. Carter, you're stronger today," she said warmly. "The doctors say you might be moved out of ICU soon." Emily nodded gratefully. "Thank you." She forced herself to take a bite of soup, her hands still trembling, but each spoonful felt like reclaiming a piece of herself. When the nurse left, Michael leaned closer. "Daniel will come after you, Emily. He's desperate, and desperate men are dangerous. Are you sure you want to do this?" Her gaze sharpened, fiercer than he had ever seen. "He tried to silence me. He tried to silence my child. If I stay quiet now, then he wins, and I won't let that happen." Michael felt a swell of admiration. She was no longer just a victim. She was a survivor, ready to face the storm head-on. Outside the hospital, protests were already forming. Crowds held signs reading "Justice for Emily" and "Protect the Innocent." The world had taken sides, and Emily's courage was fueling them. Later that evening, as Michael prepared to draft her official testimony, Emily whispered something that struck him deeply. "I married Daniel because I thought love meant sacrifice. But now I know love means protecting what's right. I owe that to my baby. I owe that to myself." Michael squeezed her hand, his voice steady. "Then we'll make sure your voice is heard. He can't hide anymore." Emily leaned back against her pillows, exhausted but unbroken. And though her body was still healing, her spirit had risen, ready to confront the man who tried to destroy her. Rain sat in her luxury apartment, staring blankly at the television as the news replayed the damning video. Each frame burned into her mind: Daniel's shove, Emily's fall, the crowd's horrified screams. She had told herself for months that Daniel's ambition was thrilling, that his wealth could shield them both. But now, every channel, every headline, every whisper painted her as complicit. Her phone buzzed relentlessly, calls from friends, messages from reporters, even threats from strangers who labeled her the mistress, who stood by while a wife almost died. Rain's hands shook as she scrolled through the vitriol. The life she had chased, glamour, power, luxury, was turning into a nightmare. When Daniel stormed into her apartment that evening, his face was a mask of fury. "Why didn't you answer my calls?" he snapped, slamming the door behind him. Rain flinched. "Because I'm drowning, Daniel. Do you even see what's happening? They're tearing me apart out there." Daniel's eyes narrowed, cold and dismissive. "You think you're the victim here? I'm the one losing everything, my company, my reputation, my future. And you," he pointed at her accusingly, "you're supposed to stand by me." Her lips trembled, but anger sparked in her chest. "Stand by you? While the whole world knows what you did? Daniel, they saw you push her. They saw it with their own eyes. You can't erase that." He stepped closer, his voice low and dangerous. "Watch your mouth. If you want any future with me, you'll stay silent. Do you understand? One wrong word and you'll go down with me." For a moment, Rain froze. The man who once showered her with gifts now stood before her like a stranger, controlling, threatening, toxic. She thought of Emily lying in the hospital, fighting for her life. She thought of the baby. And for the first time, guilt pierced through her fear. "I won't go to prison for you," she whispered. Daniel's eyes flared. "What did you just say?" "I said," Rain repeated, her voice steadier now, "I'm not taking the fall. If saving myself means telling the truth, then I will." Daniel grabbed her wrist roughly, his face inches from hers. "Don't test me, Rain. You need me." But she yanked her arm free, tears burning in her eyes. "No, Daniel, you needed me. But now, you're nothing but a sinking ship." That night, Rain made a call she never imagined making. Her hands trembled as she dialed the sheriff's office. When Michael answered, his deep voice steady, she almost hung up. But then she forced the words out. "This is Rain," she said. "I know things about Daniel, about what happened that night. If you'll protect me, I'll testify." There was silence, then Michael's calm reply, "You're doing the right thing. Meet me tomorrow. We'll keep you safe." Rain hung up, her heart pounding. She knew Daniel would come after her if he discovered the betrayal, but she also knew her choice had sealed his fate. For the first time, Daniel Carter's strongest ally had turned into his deadliest enemy. The sheriff's office smelled faintly of coffee and cold steel, its walls lined with case files and maps of the county. Michael Carter sat behind his desk, But he wasn't just the sheriff tonight. He was a brother preparing for a war he never wanted. In front of him lay a folder thick with statements, screenshots of the viral video, and now Rain's sworn testimony. Every page screamed the same truth. Daniel was guilty. The door swung open. Daniel entered without knocking, dressed sharply as if his suit alone could hold his world together. His jaw was tight, his eyes defiant. "You wanted to see me?" he asked, his tone a mixture of arrogance and unease. Michael rose slowly, his towering frame casting a shadow across the desk. "I didn't want to, Daniel, but it's time." Daniel scoffed, forcing a laugh that rang hollow. "Don't tell me you actually believe all this noise. You know me. I wouldn't hurt her." Emily slipped. "Stop," Michael cut in, his voice sharp enough to silence the room. "Don't insult me with lies. I was there. I saw the way you grabbed her. I saw the rage in your eyes. And now I have statements from half the guests, from hospital staff, and from Rain herself. You shoved her, Daniel. You nearly killed your wife. You nearly killed your child." Daniel's face darkened, his mask of charm cracking. "Rain," he spat. "That ungrateful. She was supposed to protect me." Michael leaned forward, his fists planted on the desk. "She finally saw you for what you are. So did the world. You can't buy your way out this time. The truth is bigger than you." For the first time, Daniel's voice wavered. "I'm your brother, Mike. We've been through everything together. You'd turn on me? For her?" Michael's eyes burned with restrained fury. "I swore to protect the innocent. That includes Emily and her baby. Blood doesn't excuse murder, Daniel. You crossed a line, and I won't let you drag this family into the grave with you." Silence thickened between them, broken only by the faint ticking of the office clock. Daniel's fists trembled at his sides, his arrogance slipping into desperation. "If you arrest me, you'll destroy what's left of this family. Think about Mom. Think about Dad." Michael's voice softened, but it carried iron. "If they were alive, they'd be ashamed of what you've become. Power poisoned you, Daniel. And now it's over." Daniel's eyes darted around the room, searching for an escape. But there was none. Michael stepped closer, his voice low and final. "Cooperate, or I'll come for you myself. Either way, justice is coming." Daniel's lips curled into a bitter sneer, but his bravado faltered. He knew his brother's word was iron. Michael watched him leave, his shoulders slumped, his empire collapsing. And as the office door slammed shut, Michael knew the final battle between blood and justice had truly begun. The courthouse buzzed with tension, every bench filled with reporters, onlookers, and murmuring voices. The world had waited for this moment. The trial of Daniel Carter, the once celebrated CEO accused of attempting to murder his pregnant wife. Flashbulbs exploded outside as he was escorted in, his tailored suit immaculate, his expression carved from stone. He tried to project control, but beneath the surface, his empire was crumbling. Emily entered moments later, supported by a nurse and Michael. She wore a simple dress, her face pale, but her chin lifted in quiet defiance. The sight of her walking alive drew gasps from the gallery. Daniel's eyes flicked toward her, a storm of anger and desperation flashing before he quickly masked it with a smug half-smile. The judge called the court to order, and the prosecution wasted no time. Witness after witness described the gala, the argument, the rage, the push. Each testimony stacked higher against Daniel. The viral video was played for the jury, and the courtroom fell silent as Emily's body tumbled across the screen. The sound of the crowd's horrified screams echoed in everyone's memory. Then came the moment everyone had waited for, Emily's testimony. She rose slowly, gripping the railing as she walked to the stand. The oxygen in her breath was still faint, but her voice carried strength. She looked directly at the jury, then at Daniel. "That night, I begged my husband to tell the truth. Instead, he chose to silence me. He looked into my eyes, and with full intent, he shoved me down those stairs. He didn't care about me. He didn't care about our baby. He only cared about protecting his pride." Gasps rippled through the gallery. Some wiped tears from their eyes. Daniel's lawyer stood, sharp and cutting. "Mrs. Carter, isn't it true that you were emotional? Isn't it possible you stumbled on your own? After all, pregnancy can cause imbalance." Emily's eyes narrowed. "Pregnancy makes me tired, not blind. I know the difference between stumbling and being shoved, and so does everyone who saw it." Her words struck like a hammer. The jury leaned forward, riveted. Even the judge's stern mask softened for a brief second. Then Daniel himself demanded to testify. His lawyer tried to stop him, but his pride would not allow silence. He strode to the stand, his voice dripping with false sincerity. "Ladies and gentlemen, I love my wife. I would never hurt her. She's confused, manipulated by others, by my brother, the sheriff, who has always envied my success. This is nothing more than a conspiracy to bring me down." But as he spoke, Rain was called in as a rebuttal witness. Her heels clicked against the floor as she walked in, her red dress replaced by a modest suit. Her voice trembled at first, then steadied. "Daniel told me himself that night he wished Emily would just disappear. He said she was ruining his life. I was blind, but I'm not blind anymore. He did it. I saw the rage. I saw the shove." The courtroom erupted, the gavel slamming for order. Daniel's face turned crimson, his composure cracking as the walls closed in. And in that charged silence, everyone knew the verdict was already being written in their hearts. The courtroom was silent as the jury filed back in, their expressions grave. The judge's gavel struck once, sharp and final. Has the jury reached a verdict? A middle-aged woman, the foreperson, stood, holding a slip of paper that carried the weight of destiny. "We have, Your Honor." Every breath in the room seemed to pause. Emily sat at the prosecution's table, her hands trembling slightly on her lap. Michael sat beside her, his presence steady as stone, his eyes never leaving Daniel. Across the aisle, Daniel leaned forward, his suit pressed, his face pale but defiant. He still believed he could charm his way out, that somehow money and arrogance could bend justice. The foreperson read aloud. "On the charge of attempted murder, we find the defendant, Daniel Carter, guilty." Gasps and murmurs rippled through the gallery. Some clapped their hands to their mouths, others whispered, "Finally." Emily exhaled a shaky breath, her eyes welling with tears. Michael placed a protective hand over hers, grounding her in the moment. Daniel shot to his feet, his composure shattering. "No, this is a mistake. You don't understand. I'm the victim here. My wife is lying. My brother framed me." His voice cracked, desperation cutting through his arrogance. "Order in the court," the judge barked, pounding the gavel as bailiffs rushed forward. Daniel thrashed against them, his mask fully gone. "You can't do this to me. I built this city. I built everything. You think you can take it all away?" His words echoed, manic and hollow, as the bailiffs pinned his arms and began dragging him back. Emily watched, her tears finally falling, not from sorrow but from release. The man who had haunted her nights, who had turned love into chains, was finally stripped of his power. The judge's voice cut through the chaos. "Daniel Carter, you are hereby remanded into custody pending sentencing. Given the evidence, this court recommends the maximum penalty under the law." The gavel fell again, final and unforgiving. Daniel's eyes darted wildly, landing on Emily. For a fleeting second, there was no rage, only emptiness. His empire was gone. His mistress had betrayed him, his brother had defeated him, and the woman he tried to silence now stood taller than ever. As he was dragged from the courtroom, reporters shouted questions, their cameras capturing every moment of his downfall. His name, once synonymous with power, was now etched into scandal. Emily leaned into Michael, her shoulders shaking. "It's over," she whispered, almost as if she didn't believe it herself. Michael squeezed her hand, his voice low but firm. "Yes, it's over. He can't hurt you anymore." For the first time in months, Emily felt the heavy weight lift from her chest. The battle had left scars, physical, emotional, and invisible, but she had survived. She had spoken. And she had been heard. The courtroom slowly emptied, but Emily remained seated for a moment longer, closing her eyes as tears slipped down her cheeks. The sound of Daniel's protests fading down the corridor was the sweetest silence she had ever known. And though the fight had been brutal, justice had prevailed, leaving Emily free to step into a future Daniel could no longer touch. The sun was rising over Los Angeles, casting soft gold across the hospital windows. For the first time in weeks, Emily Carter sat without machines tethered to her body, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders, her hair pulled back simply, her face pale but peaceful. In her arms, she held the tiny bundle that had survived the nightmare, a baby girl, breathing softly against her chest. Emily traced her daughter's cheek with trembling fingers. "You're my miracle," she whispered, her voice breaking. "You're the reason I fought to stay alive." Michael entered quietly, his badge clipped to his belt, but his expression softened into something more than a sheriff's duty. He carried a small bouquet awkwardly wrapped, clearly from the hospital gift shop. "The nurses said flowers might cheer you up," he said with a faint smile. Emily's lips curved gently. "They do. But nothing cheers me more than knowing she's safe." She glanced down at the baby. She doesn't know it yet, but she already changed everything. Michael sat beside her, his presence steady as always. "Daniel was sentenced this morning," he said, maximum term, no parole for a long time. He won't touch either of you again. For a moment Emily closed her eyes, letting the words sink in. The weight of fear she had carried for months finally slipped away, replaced by a fragile but growing peace. "Justice was served," she murmured. "Not just for me, but for her." Michael's gaze softened as he looked at his niece. "She'll grow up knowing her mother was stronger than fear. She'll know the truth." Emily wiped her eyes, emotions flooding through her. "I was terrified, Michael. I thought speaking out would break me. But in the end, it saved me. It saved her." Outside the hospital, crowds still held signs. Justice for Emily, but now their chants carried celebration rather than outrage. The world had seen the darkness, but it had also witnessed Emily's courage. Later that afternoon, Emily was wheeled outside, her baby cradled in her arms. Flashbulbs burst, but this time she didn't lower her head. She lifted her chin, shielding her daughter gently, but meeting the cameras with quiet defiance. She wasn't Daniel's shadow anymore. She was her own story, one of survival, resilience, and hope. Michael stood behind her, a silent guardian, ready to protect them both as family and as law. On the ride home, Emily looked out the window at the city bathed in light. She thought of the woman she had been, the bride who believed sacrifice was love, the wife who endured silence and pain. That woman had almost died on the staircase. But the woman holding her baby now was reborn. She kissed her daughter's forehead and whispered, "We're free, and no one will ever take our voice away again." Michael's steady voice broke the silence. "The world saw your strength, Emily. Now you get to live it." The car rolled on, carrying them toward a new chapter, away from shadows and into dawn. And as Emily held her child close, she knew that even in the ruins of betrayal, she had built something indestructible. A future born from courage, and a voice that would never again be silenced. So that's the end of our story, my dear friends. If you're still here with me right now, it means something in this journey touched your heart. And maybe that's the real lesson. Like the Stoics remind us, what stands in the way becomes the way. Emily turned pain into strength, silence into voice. If this story moved you, please like, share, and subscribe, so together we can keep telling stories that heal and inspire.
For Aurelian Dracoff, a man who measured the world in corporate takeovers and stock valuations, the sharp snap of his fingers was a command. It was a sound that made executives tremble and boards capitulate. But on a crisp autumn evening, at Manhattan's exclusive La Perle Noire, that sound met its match. For Nina Petrova, a waitress who measured her world in 8-hour shifts and the mounting cost of her brother's medical care, that snap wasn't a command. It was the sound of a fuse being lit. She was just a waitress. He was a titan of industry. In the space of 48 hours, she would prove that the most dangerous person in the world isn't the one with all the power, but the one with nothing left to lose. The air in La Perle Noire was thick with the scent of money. Not just the truffle oil and seared scallops, but the actual palpable aroma of wealth that clung to the velvet upholstery and the hushed conversations. Nina Petrova knew the smell well. For 2 years she had navigated this world of quiet luxury, a ghost in a crisp black uniform her presence required, but her existence unacknowledged. She was good at her job. More than good, she was exceptional. She remembered that Mrs. Davenport preferred her water with a single slice of lemon, no ice. She knew Mr. Chen was secretly allergic to shellfish and always steered him towards the duck confit. She could balance 4 plates on one arm while reciting the specials with a calm, even tone, even when her feet throbbed, and her mind was 1,000 miles away, calculating pharmacy bills. Her mind was often 1,000 miles away. Most nights after her shift ended, and the scent of money was replaced by the smell of antiseptic cleaner, she would take the subway back to her tiny Queen's apartment. There, under the flickering light of a desk lamp, the waitress uniform would be replaced by heavy textbooks on torts and contract law. Nina wasn't just a waitress. She was a third-year scholarship student at Columbia Law School, an irony so sharp it sometimes made her laugh. She served the very people she would one day face in a courtroom. Tonight, however, there was no room for laughter. Her younger brother Leo had a bad turn. His cystic fibrosis was a relentless storm, and the latest experimental treatment wasn't covered by their meager insurance. The call from his doctor that afternoon had been stark. They needed a deposit of $10,000 by the end of the month to continue the therapy. $10,000. It might as well have been 10 million. Every table, every tip, every polite smile was now a desperate grab for survival. And then he walked in, Aurelian Drakov. Even if you didn't know his name, you knew his type. He moved not like he owned the place, but like he owned the very concept of places. His suit was a custom Xenia, his watch, a Patek Philippe Calatrava that cost more than Nina's entire law school tuition. He was flanked by two younger men in identical, slightly less expensive suits, their faces a mixture of fear and ambition. Mr. Gerard, the restaurant's owner, scurried over his usual professional composure, melting into anxious obsequiousness. Mr. Drakov. A pleasure. Your usual table is ready, of course. Drakov didn't acknowledge him. His cold grey eyes swept the room, dismissing it before landing on his table. It was in Nina's section. Of course, from the moment he sat, the air grew tense. He didn't speak to her. He spoke at her, or rather at the space she occupied. Water. Still. Now. Steak. Rare. Don't let the chef ruin it. This wine is corked. Bring the 82 Lafitte, and don't spill it. Nina endured it all with the practiced stoicism of a service professional. She smiled, she nodded. She refilled glasses without being asked. She ignored the way he never made eye contact, the way he gestured with a dismissive wave of his hand. She needed the tip. She pictured Leo's pale face, the hiss of his nebulizer. She could endure anything for him. The main course had just been cleared when the incident happened. Drakov was pontificating to his acolytes about a recent hostile takeover of a smaller tech firm, Innovatech. His voice was a low, predatory rumble. They were sentimental fools, Drakov sneered, swirling the deep red wine in his glass. Crying about company culture and employee loyalty. I bought their debt, strangled their credit lines, and bought the whole damn thing for pennies on the dollar. The CEO, a man named Peterson, he actually wept in the final meeting. He chuckled a dry, rasping sound. I told him tears aren't a liquid asset. The younger men laughed a little too loudly. Nina, standing a discreet distance away, felt a cold knot form in her stomach. She had read about the Innovatech takeover. Hundreds of employees had been laid off just before the holidays. Their pensions were gone. She had read a human interest piece about a single father, an engineer at the company, who now struggled to make ends meet. Drakov leaned back, satisfied with his story, and held up his empty water glass. He didn't look at her. He didn't gesture. He snapped his fingers. Snap. The sound cut through the restaurant's genteel hum. It was sharp, loud, and utterly demeaning. It was the sound of a master summoning a dog. Every head in the vicinity turned. Nina felt a hot flush creep up her neck. She could feel the pitying glances from the other tables, the nervous stare of Mr. Gerard from across the room. She thought of Leo. She thought of the $10,000. She took a half step forward. Snap, snap. He did it again, more impatiently this time, his gaze fixed on one of his companions. Something inside Nina, a cord of self-respect that had been stretched taut for years, finally broke. The law student, the fierce advocate she was training to be, rose up and silenced the desperate waitress. She walked calmly to the table. She didn't pick up the water pitcher. She stood, placed her hands behind her back, and met Aurelian Drakov's gaze for the first time. His eyes widened slightly in surprise, unused to being directly addressed by the help. "My name," Nina said, her voice low, but carrying the clear, precise enunciation of a future litigator, "is Nina. And in the future, if you require my attention, you may use it." A profound silence fell over the table. The two younger men looked like they had just witnessed a squirrel pull a gun. Drakov's face, which had been a mask of smug arrogance, slowly began to curdle. A vein throbbed at his temple. He had been challenged, publicly, by a waitress. He pushed his chair back, the legs scraping harshly against the polished floor. "What did you just say to me?" he hissed. "I said my name is Nina." She repeated, her heart hammering against her ribs, but her voice impossibly steady. "I'd be happy to refill your water if you ask me properly." Mr. Gerard was suddenly there, his face ashen. "Mr. Drakov, I am so sorry. Please forgive her. She's new." "I'm not new," Nina said, not taking her eyes off Drakov. "You're fired," Gerard stammered, grabbing Nina's arm. "Get your things. Get out. Now." Aurelian Drakov leaned back in his chair, a slow, cruel smile spreading across his lips. He had won. He always won. He looked Nina up and down, his eyes lingering on her cheap, worn shoes. "Learn your place," he murmured, then turned back to his guests, as if she had already vanished. Tears of rage and fear pricked at Nina's eyes as Gerard manhandled her towards the kitchen. She had just lost her job. The $10,000 now seemed like a distant star. As she was shoved through the swinging doors, she took one last look at Aurelian Drakov. He was laughing, telling another story. And in that moment, Nina Petrova didn't feel despair. She felt a cold, crystalline resolve. He had told her to learn her place. And she would. Her place, she decided, was not in the shadows serving him. It was on the other side of a very large, very unforgiving table. The slamming of the kitchen door was the gunshot that started the race. Nina's world, already precariously balanced, shattered. The clatter of the kitchen, the shouts of the chefs, the hiss of the grill. It all faded into a dull roar in her ears. Mr. Gerard, his face a blotchy mess of panic and anger, shoved her locker key into her hand. "Are you insane?" He spat his voice, a hoarse whisper, to avoid alerting the rest of the staff. "Do you have any idea who that was Aurelian Drakov could buy this restaurant with the money in his couch cushions and turn it into his personal bathroom? He could ruin me." Nina said nothing. She was numb. The adrenaline from her defiance was rapidly being replaced by the icy dread of reality. Her hands trembled as she fumbled with the lock on her small metal locker. Inside was her worn copy of Prosser on Torts, her backpack, and a photo of Leo smiling, taken on a good day before the last hospital stay. His face, usually a source of strength, was now a portrait of her failure. "I want you out of here in 2 minutes," Gerard continued, pacing behind her. "Don't talk to anyone. Your final paycheck will be mailed. Just go." She pulled on her threadbare coat over her uniform, the fabric a poor defense against the cold November night that awaited her. She didn't have the energy to argue about being fired on the spot, about the lack of cause. She just wanted to disappear. The walk to the subway station was a blur. The glittering lights of Manhattan, usually a source of wonder, seemed to mock her. Each passing limousine, each laughing couple stepping out of a theater, was a testament to a world she had just been violently ejected from. She was an outsider again, a ghost on the city streets. Back in her apartment, the silence was deafening. It was a tiny space, a converted studio, where the kitchen was 2 feet from the bed, but it was her sanctuary. Tonight it felt like a prison cell. She sank onto her lumpy mattress, the waitress uniform still on, feeling the grime and grease of her final disastrous shift cling to her skin. The numbers screamed in her head. Rent was due next week. The electricity bill was already late. And then there was the $10,000. The chasm between her and that sum was no longer just wide. It was infinite. The part-time paralegal job she had lined up for the winter break wouldn't even cover a fraction of it. Panic, cold and sharp, seized her. Her breath hitched. She saw Leo struggling for air, his lungs betraying him. She saw the disappointment in his eyes, the unspoken fear that his big sister, the one who was supposed to fix everything, couldn't. She reached for her phone, her thumb hovering over her mother's number. What would she even say? "Hi, Mom, I just got fired for standing up to a billionaire, so Leo's treatment is off." The shame was a physical weight. No, not her mum. Not yet. Her fingers scrolled through her contacts past classmates and part-time co-workers until they landed on a name she rarely used, a number reserved for true emergencies: Benjamin Carter. Ben Carter wasn't just a name in her phone. He was a partner at Carter, Shaw and Associates, one of the most formidable litigation firms in New York. And for the last 6 months, Nina had been his personal intern through a highly competitive Columbia law program. She wasn't just a coffee fetcher. Ben had seen something in her, a keen eye, a relentless work ethic, a mind that could cut through legal jargon like a scalpel. He had become her mentor, a gruff but brilliant guide through the labyrinth of corporate law. He had given her his private number on her first day. "For emergencies only, Petrova," he had said, his eyes twinkling. "And I don't mean a paper jam." Was this an emergency? It felt like the end of the world. With a trembling hand, she pressed the call button. It was nearly midnight. He would be angry, or worse, he wouldn't answer. It rang once, twice. "Carter," a deep, slightly weary voice answered. There was no hello. "Mr. Carter, it's Nina Petrova. I'm so sorry to call this late." There was a pause. She could hear the rustle of papers in the background. He was still at the office. "Petrova, what's wrong? You sound terrible." The dam broke. The carefully constructed composure she had maintained since leaving the restaurant crumbled, and the story came tumbling out in a torrent of choked words. The restaurant Aurelian Drakov, the snap of his fingers, Leo's treatment, the $10,000 being fired. She left out the part about Drakov's speech on the Innovatech takeover, dismissing it as irrelevant background noise to her personal catastrophe. She expected him to be disappointed, to tell her she had been foolish, that she should have swallowed her pride for the sake of her job. She expected a lecture. Instead, the silence on the other end of the line was long and thoughtful. When he finally spoke, his voice had lost its weariness. It was replaced by something else, something cold and sharp. "Aurelian Drakov, you said?" "Yes," Nina whispered. "Of Drakov Capital." Another pause. "The restaurant is La Perle Noire on the Upper East Side." "Yes, Mr. Carter." "And the owner's name is Gerard Frank Gerard." I think so, yes." "Mr. Gerard." "Okay, Nina." Ben said, his voice now crisp and commanding, all business. "I want you to do 2 things for me. First, breathe. This is not the end of the world. It's the beginning of something else. Second, I want you to go to sleep. Get some rest. Don't call your family. Don't panic about the money. Just rest." "But my job," Your job is the last thing you need to worry about right now, he said cryptically. Be at my office tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. sharp. Wear the best suit you own. I don't really have a suit, just a blazer and a skirt I wear for moot court. That'll do just fine, Petrova. That'll do just fine. Now get some sleep. We have a busy day tomorrow. He hung up before she could ask any more questions. Nina stared at her phone, bewildered. There was no lecture, no pity. There was a plan. She didn't understand it, but the authority in his voice was a lifeline. For the first time in hours, the panic receded, replaced by a flicker of something she hadn't felt all night, curiosity. She didn't know why a high-powered litigator like Ben Carter would take such a sudden, intense interest in a waitress's wrongful termination. She didn't know what he was planning, but as she finally changed out of her uniform and slid into a cold bed, one thought echoed in her mind. Ben Carter had asked for Aurelian Drakov's name, and he had known the name of the restaurant's owner without her telling him. This was about more than a waitress talking back. Much more. The next morning, the lobby of Carter Shaw and Associates felt like a different universe. The air here was climate-controlled, scented with nothing at all, and the silence was punctuated only by the soft clicking of keyboards and the whisper of expensive leather shoes on marble floors. It was a world of power, and Nina, in her slightly too big blazer and scuffed-up heels, felt like an imposter. She had barely slept, her mind racing with 1,000 possibilities, each more unlikely than the last. Maybe Mr. Carter was going to write a stern letter. Maybe he would offer her a loan. The idea that he would do more seemed fantastical. When she was shown into his corner office, the view of Central Park spreading out below Ben Carter was not alone. He was standing with another man, older with a weathered face and the weary eyes of a man who had seen too many legal battles. He was holding a thick, leather-bound folio. "Nina Good," Ben said, gesturing for her to come in. "This is Joseph McInerney. He's the best process server in the state of New York. We were just going over the itinerary." Nina blinked. "Process server itinerary, Mr. Carter, I don't understand." Ben smiled a rare, wolfish grin that she had only seen when he was about to dismantle an opponent's argument in a mock trial. "You filed a complaint. I just formalized it. Wrongful termination, hostile work environment, intentional infliction of emotional distress. We're asking for damages. Significant damages." He slid a document across his vast mahogany desk. Nina picked it up. It was a formal complaint with her name as the plaintiff, and La Perle Noire Inc., and Frank Gerard as the defendants. The legalese was dense, but the message was clear. It was an act of war. "But how can we prove it?" Nina asked, her head spinning. "It's my word against a billionaire's. Mr. Gerard will lie to protect him." "Let me worry about that," Ben said smoothly. "All you need to do right now is come with us. Joe here is going to serve the papers. I think it's important that Mr. Gerard sees you." An hour later, Nina found herself standing on the familiar sidewalk outside La Perle Noire. The morning sun glinted off the polished brass plaque. It was just before the lunch rush, and the staff would be in the middle of their prep. It felt surreal to be on this side of the door, a customer, a threat. "All right," Ben said, adjusting his tie. He was wearing a dark, perfectly tailored suit that radiated quiet authority. "Let's not keep Mr. Gerard waiting." Walking through the doors of La Perle Noire was like stepping back into her own nightmare. The hostess, a young woman named Sophie, saw her, and her face paled. "Nina, what are you doing here?" Mr. Gerard said. "We're here to see Mr. Gerard." Ben Carter cut in his voice, polite but firm. "It's a legal matter." Sophie looked from Nina's determined face to Ben's imposing figure, and wisely decided to fetch the owner. Frank Gerard emerged from his office, a napkin still tucked into his collar. When he saw Nina, his face flushed with anger. "I told you to get out. You're trespassing. I'm calling the police." "That won't be necessary, Mr. Gerard," Ben said, stepping forward. "My name is Benjamin Carter of Carter Shaw and Associates. I am Ms. Petrova's legal counsel." The name of the firm hit Gerard like a physical blow. He visibly staggered. Carter Shaw and Associates wasn't some ambulance-chasing outfit. They were major league. They handled billion-dollar mergers and international trade disputes. The idea that they would represent a fired waitress was so preposterous, it was terrifying. "Legal counsel," he stammered. "For what she insulted a customer, I have every right, Mr. McInerney." Ben said, ignoring Gerard completely. The process server stepped forward and extended the thick folio. "Frank Gerard, you have been served." Gerard stared at the document, as if it were a venomous snake. He refused to take it. McInerney, with practiced ease, simply dropped it at his feet. The folio landed with a heavy, definitive thud on the pristine floor. "This is ridiculous," Gerard spluttered, his voice rising in panic. "A shakedown. You think you can intimidate me? I have lawyers too, and Aurelian Drakov will—" "Ah, yes, Mr. Drakov," Ben said, his voice dropping to a dangerously quiet level. "I'm so glad you brought him up. You see, this lawsuit, it's really just the appetizer." He took a step closer, and Gerard instinctively took a step back. "The main course," Ben continued, "is for Mr. Drakov. Tell me, Mr. Gerard, do you keep detailed records of your platinum-level clients? Their receipts? The days they dine, who they dine with?" Gerard's face went from red to a pasty white. "Our client records are private." "Of course they are," Ben said with a thin smile. "But a lawsuit allows for a lovely little thing called discovery. And we will be discovering everything. We'll be deposing every member of your staff who was working last night. We'll be subpoenaing your reservation logs, your credit card receipts, and most importantly, your security camera footage." At the mention of security footage, a flicker of pure terror crossed Gerard's face. Nina remembered the small black dome of the camera in the corner, angled directly at Drakov's table. "I imagine a man like Aurelian Drakov has many private conversations here," Ben mused aloud. "Conversations about business, about deals, about companies like, oh, I don't know, Innovatech." The name hung in the air. Gerard looked as if he was going to be physically ill. "This is just a wrongful termination suit, Mr. Gerard," Ben said, turning to leave. "For now. But my client has a very sharp memory, and if this matter isn't resolved to our satisfaction quickly and quietly, our next filing won't be with the local civil court. It will be with the Securities and Exchange Commission and the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York." He placed a hand on Nina's shoulder. "Ms. Petrova and I will be in touch through your counsel. Have a pleasant lunch service." As they walked out the door and into the bright sunlight, Nina was breathless. The fear and shame she had felt just hours before had been replaced by a dizzying sense of power. She looked back through the glass. Frank Gerard was on his knees, his hands shaking, as he picked up the thick legal document from the floor. The appetizer had been served. The ride back to Ben Carter's office was silent. Nina stared out the window of the black town car, the city streets a meaningless smear of color. Her mind was replaying the scene at the restaurant, the look of sheer panic on Frank Gerard's face. She turned to her mentor, who was calmly scrolling through emails on his phone. "Mr. Carter." "Ben," she began, her voice still trembling slightly. "How did you know about Innovatech? I never mentioned it when I called you." Ben looked up from his phone, fixing her with his intense gaze. Because Petrova Aurelian Drakov is not a new name on our radar. Drakov Capital has been the subject of whispers and rumors for years. Vulture capitalism, aggressive takeovers, gutting companies and pensions. It's all perfectly legal if morally bankrupt. But for the last year, we've had a client, a former executive at a different company Drakov swallowed, who is convinced Drakov is crossing the line from aggressive to illegal. Insider trading, market manipulation. The problem is Drakov is smart. He's insulated. He doesn't leave a paper trail. He leaned forward, his expression serious. We've been looking for a crack in his armor, a witness, a leaked document, anything. We've spent a year and hundreds of thousands of dollars in investigative fees and come up with nothing. Then last night you call me. You, my brilliant intern with the near photographic memory, just happened to be standing tableside, while Aurelian Drakov, in a fit of hubris, drunkenly bragged to his underlings about the Innovatech takeover. The pieces began to click into place for Nina. You think he said something incriminating? I don't think it. I'm betting on it, Ben said. You were focused on the personal insult, on the injustice of your firing. But I need you to go back. Think. What exactly did he say? Every word, Nina. Every single word. They were back in his office. Now the door closed, a legal pad and pen in front of Nina. Ben poured her a glass of water, his demeanor shifting from that of a legal predator to a patient mentor. Close your eyes if you need to, he said gently. Put yourself back there. The smells, the sounds. You're standing by the service station. Drakov is holding his wine glass. Nina took a deep breath and closed her eyes. The scene materialized in her mind, no longer a fuzzy memory of humiliation, but a piece of evidence to be analyzed. Drakov's sneering voice echoed in her head. They were sentimental fools, crying about company culture. I bought their debt, strangled their credit lines, and bought the whole damn thing for pennies on the dollar. She recited the words slowly, and Ben's pen flew across his own notepad. Okay, that's just him being an arrogant pig, Ben said. Standard operating procedure for him. Keep going. What else? Nina focused harder. There was more. After the talk about the weeping CEO, one of the younger men had asked a question. Yes, she said, her eyes snapping open. One of his associates, a man with a red tie, asked him something. He said, the board caved faster than we expected. The stock price tanked the morning of the final vote. Our timing was impeccable. Ben stopped writing. He looked at Nina, his eyes gleaming with excitement. And what did Drakov say in response? Nina's memory, honed by years of memorizing case law, delivered the quote with chilling precision. Drakov laughed. He said, impeccable timing is for amateurs. I prefer manufactured timing. It pays to have friends at the top. When Peterson's little press release about their promising Q4 outlook was delayed by a server crash at the newswire, it wasn't a glitch. It was a phone call. Ben put his pen down and stared at her. He said that a server crash at the newswire was a phone call. Yes, Nina confirmed, the full weight of the words finally hitting her. He was admitting to sabotaging the release of positive news for Innovatech. The news would have bolstered their stock price before the takeover vote. Without it, the stock plummeted, creating the panic that allowed him to buy them out for nothing. Ben stood up and began to pace the length of his office, a caged tiger who had just been thrown a side of beef. That's not just a smoking gun, Nina. That's a ballistic missile. It's conspiracy to commit securities fraud. It's market manipulation. It's a federal crime that carries a mandatory prison sentence. He turned to face her, a wide, triumphant grin on his face. This whole wrongful termination suit, it was just a pretext, a crowbar to pry open the door. Gerard is our way in. He has the security footage. If the audio is clear, we have Aurelian Drakov in his own voice confessing to a felony. Nina was stunned. Her small act of defiance, her moment of talking back, had inadvertently stumbled into a massive corporate crime. But the footage might not have audio. She pointed out the cautious law student in her taking over. And even if it does, Drakov's lawyers will fight the subpoena. They'll claim it's a fishing expedition, that it's an invasion of his privacy. Let them fight, Ben declared, his voice booming with confidence. They'll file motions to quash. We'll file counter-motions. It'll be a bloody battle. But the mere existence of that footage, and the fact that we are fighting for it because we believe it contains evidence of a crime, will be enough to spook his investors and partners. The rumor will spread like wildfire on Wall Street. Aurelian Drakov is under investigation. He sat down opposite her, his expression softening. Nina, you've handed us the ace in the hole we've been searching for a year. But this is about to get much, much bigger than a firing. Drakov's legal team plays dirty. They will try to discredit you. They will dig into every aspect of your life, your grades, your finances, your family. They will try to paint you as a disgruntled employee, a liar, an extortionist. Are you ready for that? Nina thought of Leo. She thought of the $10,000, a sum that now seemed laughably small in the context of this conversation. This was no longer just about her brother's health or her lost job. It was about the man who laughed about destroying lives, the man who saw people like the Innovatech CEO like her as insignificant insects to be crushed. She met Ben Carter's gaze, her own eyes hard with resolve. Mr. Carter, she said, her voice clear and strong. Where do we start? The first shot from Drakov's camp came 2 days later. It wasn't a legal filing or a phone call. It was a courier. A sleek black motorcycle pulled up outside Nina's apartment building, and the driver, clad in anonymous leather, delivered a crisp, cream-colored envelope. There was no return address. Inside was a cashier's check for $25,000. Attached to it was a single sheet of heavy bond paper. There was no letterhead, just a few lines of typed text. Ms. Petrova, this should more than cover any inconvenience you may have experienced. It constitutes a full and final settlement of any and all claims, real or imagined. Your signature on the enclosed non-disclosure agreement is required. Continued pursuit of this matter will be met with the most vigorous defense imaginable. It wasn't an offer. It was a threat wrapped in money. Nina's hands shook as she held the check, $25,000. It was more money than she had ever seen in her life. It would cover Leo's treatment deposit, pay her rent for a year, and erase her debts. It was a golden key, an easy way out. All she had to do was sign a piece of paper and pretend last night never happened. She immediately called Ben. Burn it, was his simple, immediate response. Ben, this is life-changing money for me. She argued the temptation, a bitter taste in her mouth. It's hush money, Nina, and it's a fraction of what they're scared of losing. This is an admission of guilt. They're trying to see if you can be bought cheaply. Don't fall for it. Fax me a copy of the letter and the check, then shred them both. The next move came from Drakov's official legal team. Nina and Ben were summoned to a meeting at the offices of Wachtel, Lipton, Rosen & Katz, a legal powerhouse that made Ben's already prestigious firm look like a small-town practice. They were ushered into a conference room on the 50th floor, a sterile glass and steel box designed to intimidate. Across the table sat Aurelian Drakov's lead counsel, a woman whose name was whispered with fear in legal circles, Genevieve Dubois. She was impeccably dressed in a severe grey suit, her dark hair pulled back in a tight chignon. Her smile was a bloodless slash of red lipstick. Mr. Carter, Ms. Petrova. She began, her voice as cool and polished as the marble tabletop. Let's dispense with the pleasantries. My client finds this entire situation to be a distasteful nuisance, an opportunistic lawsuit filed by a disgruntled former employee and her overly ambitious counsel. My client was publicly humiliated and unlawfully terminated. Ben countered his tone, relaxed, betraying no intimidation. We're simply seeking just compensation. Genevieve laughed, a short, sharp bark devoid of humor. Compensation or extortion. You received our client's generous good faith offer. Your rejection of it speaks volumes. She then slid a thick file across the table. It was a dossier on Nina. We've been busy, Genevieve said, her eyes locking onto Nina's. Nina Petrova, age 26, full scholarship to Columbia Law, impressive, but also a significant amount of debt. A younger brother, Leo, with a very expensive medical condition. Your father left when you were 10. Your mother works 2 jobs as a home health aide in New Jersey. You've been late on your rent 3 times in the last year. You are, to put it bluntly, desperate. Nina felt the blood drain from her face. They had dissected her life, laid bare all her vulnerabilities. You see, Genevieve continued, pressing her advantage. The narrative we will present to a jury is a simple one. A desperate young woman sees an opportunity to score a payday from a wealthy man. A simple misunderstanding over service is twisted into a grand conspiracy. It's a sad, predictable story. And the security footage? Ben asked, unfazed. A fishing expedition for which you have no legal basis, Genevieve snapped back. My client's private conversations are just that, private. We will fight your subpoena with every resource at our disposal. It will be tied up in court for years. By the time a judge even rules on it, Ms. Petrova will have been buried under a mountain of legal fees, and her reputation in the legal community will be in tatters before it has even begun. Is that what you want, Miss Petrova? To be known as the girl who tried to shake down Aurelian Drakov? It was a brutal, targeted assault. They were turning her desperation, her love for her family, into a weapon against her. Doubt began to creep in. Was she in over her head? Was she destroying her future before it even started? Ben let the silence hang in the air for a long moment before he spoke. That's a very compelling story, Genevieve, he said, nodding slowly. Well crafted. Threatening. It has all the classic elements. But you've overlooked one thing. And what might that be? She asked with a smirk. Ben leaned forward, his folksy demeanor gone, replaced by the steel of a seasoned litigator. You think we're after Drakov. We are. But you think this is a civil matter. It isn't. He pulled a single piece of paper from his briefcase and slid it across the table. It wasn't a legal filing. It was a printout of an article from the Financial Times from 3 weeks ago. The headline read, SEC launches inquiry into irregular trading activity surrounding Innovatech acquisition. Genevieve's smirk faltered for the first time. You see, Ben continued, we're not the only ones asking questions about what happened to Innovatech. The government is already sniffing around. All they're missing is a credible witness. A witness who can place Aurelian Drakov at a specific time and place discussing specific methods of market manipulation. A witness who, say, overheard a confession. He stood up, pushing his chair back. Our lawsuit isn't a shakedown. It's an invitation. We are inviting Frank Gerard of La Perle Noire to turn over his security footage. If he refuses, he risks being seen as an accessory to a federal crime. We are inviting you, and by extension, Mr. Drakov, to make this go away civilly. Because if you fight us, if you try to bury my client, I will personally walk the evidence we have, and we have more than you think, into the office of the U.S. Attorney. And then your client won't be worried about a civil suit. He'll be worried about a prison cell. He gestured to Nina. Come on, Nina. I believe this meeting is over. As they walked out, leaving Geneviève Dubois staring at the news article in stunned silence, Nina felt a surge of adrenaline. The fear was still there, but it was now mingled with a sense of righteous purpose. They had tried to break her, to buy her, to intimidate her, and they had failed. But Nina knew this was just the beginning. Geneviève Dubois was not a woman who gave up easily. Aurélien Dracoff's empire had struck back once. The next time she knew it would be harder. The war entered a new phase, a war of paper and attrition. Geneviève Dubois was true to her word, burying them in a blizzard of legal motions. Every request Ben's team made was met with an objection, every filing with a counter-filing. They challenged the validity of the service, the jurisdiction of the court, the relevance of every single piece of discovery Ben requested. It was a classic Goliath strategy: bleed the David dry exhaust their resources and crush them with sheer procedural weight. News of the lawsuit, despite their attempts to keep it quiet, began to leak. A small piece in the New York Post's business section mentioned a wrongful termination suit filed against a prominent Upper East Side eatery that named Billionaire Aurélien Dracoff in its complaint. The article was vague, but it was enough. The sharks in the financial world could smell blood in the water. Dracoff, for his part, presented a front of utter indifference. He was photographed at charity galas laughing with politicians. He gave an interview to Bloomberg Television, where he dismissed the lawsuit as a frivolous and pathetic attempt at a lottery ticket by a disgruntled employee. But behind the scenes, Ben's sources told him Dracoff was hemorrhaging credibility. His partners were getting nervous. A planned merger was suddenly postponed indefinitely. The entire case, however, hinged on one man, Frank Gerard. He was the weak link, the gatekeeper of the evidence they so desperately needed. He had lawyered up hiring a moderately priced corporate attorney who was clearly out of his depth against both Carter Shaw and Washtel Lipton. Gerard was caught in the crossfire, and the pressure was mounting. Ben decided it was time to break him. He didn't send a letter or file a motion. He sent Nina. It was a gamble, but a calculated one. A formal legal approach would be met by Gerard's lawyer, but a personal one. That might just work. Nina found him not at the restaurant, but at a small dingy bar in Midtown, the kind of place people went when they didn't want to be seen. He was hunched over the counter, a glass of whiskey in front of him, looking 10 years older than he had a week ago. The swaggering, sycophantic owner was gone, replaced by a terrified man watching his life unravel. She slid onto the stool next to him. "Mr. Gerard." He jumped, spilling some of his drink. He stared at her, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and resentment. "You, what do you want? Haven't you done enough?" "I wanted to talk to you," Nina said, her voice calm and even, "without the lawyers." "My lawyer told me not to speak to you," he grumbled, turning back to his drink. "Does your lawyer know that Aurélien Dracoff is using you?" Nina asked softly. "Does he know that Geneviève Dubois' strategy is to paint you as the sole person responsible for my firing to completely insulate her client? They're going to make you the fall guy, Mr. Gerard. They'll argue Dracoff was just a patron and you, the owner, overreacted. The lawsuit will be your problem, not his." Gerard took a long swallow of his whiskey. "Dracoff's lawyers are handling everything. They said they would protect me." "Are they?" Nina pressed. "Have you spoken to Aurélien Dracoff since that night? Has he called you, or has he just left you to deal with his legal Rottweiler? He's a man who cuts companies and people loose the second they become a liability. Why would you be any different?" She could see the doubt in his eyes. He knew she was right. "What do you want from me?" he finally asked, his voice cracking. "The truth," Nina said, "and the tape. That's all we've ever wanted. You know what he said at that table was wrong. You know what he did to me was wrong. You just went along with it because you were scared. He's my biggest client, Gerard protested, his voice rising. He brings in $500,000 of business a year. Losing him would kill the restaurant. A federal investigation for obstruction of justice will do more than kill the restaurant, Mr. Gerard. It will land you in jail. Nina said, her voice turning sharp. Right now you are a witness, but the moment you delete that footage or lie under oath to protect him, you become a co-conspirator. Ben Carter doesn't want you. The U.S. attorney doesn't want you. They want Drakov, but they will go through you to get to him if they have to. She leaned in closer, her voice dropping to a near whisper. Ben sent me here to offer you a way out. A deal. We will drop you from the civil suit entirely. We will inform the U.S. Attorney's Office that you are a cooperating witness. You give us the unedited security footage, and you give us a sworn affidavit detailing everything you saw and heard that night. You walk away with your business intact and your freedom. But you have to choose. Are you with him, or are you with the truth? She laid one of Ben's business cards on the bar. You have 24 hours to decide. After that, the offer is off the table, and we proceed with a motion to compel, and we'll name you as a person of interest in our SEC filing. Nina stood up and walked out of the bar without looking back. She didn't know if it would work. She had laid the choice bare self-preservation versus a misguided loyalty to a man who would throw him to the wolves without a second thought. The call came the next morning. It wasn't from Gerard, but from his lawyer, his voice tinny with panic. He was calling Ben Carter. He wanted to discuss the terms of a cooperation agreement. The weakest link had broken. They were about to get the tape. The package arrived at Ben Carter's office via a bonded courier. It was a simple hard drive, an unremarkable piece of plastic and metal that held the key to $1 billion empire. They watched it in Ben's office, the blinds drawn, the tension thick enough to taste. The footage was exactly as Nina remembered. The black and white, silent video showed Drakov and his cronies at their table. It showed Nina approaching the snap of the fingers, too small a gesture to be seen, but the subsequent confrontation was clear. It showed Gerard rushing over her dismissal, her walk of shame. Then Ben clicked a button on his laptop, activating a separate audio file that Gerard's lawyer had explained was recorded on a different system linked to the cameras but stored separately. He synced it with the video. And there it was, Drakov's voice, laced with arrogance and expensive wine, filled the room. The boast about the Innovatech takeover, the sneering at the CEO, and then the critical line, clear as a bell. When Peterson's little press release about their promising Q4 outlook was delayed by a server crash at the newswire, it wasn't a glitch. It was a phone call. It was a confession caught on tape, a nuke. Ben leaned back in his chair and let out a long, slow whistle. Game set and match, he whispered. The next step was swift and decisive. Ben didn't file the tape with the court. He didn't send it to the SEC. He sent a single encrypted email to Genevieve Dubois. The subject line was one word, checkmate. The body of the email contained nothing but a secure, time-limited link to the video and audio file. Less than an hour later, the call came. Genevieve's voice had lost all of its icy composure. It was clipped professional, but underpinned by a current of barely concealed panic. She requested a settlement conference. Immediately. No clients present. Just the lawyers. The final meeting took place on neutral ground, in a rented conference room at a downtown hotel. This time there were no mind games, no dossiers, no threats. There was only the cold, hard reality of the evidence. "What do you want?" Genevieve asked, forgoing any preamble. "It's no longer about what we want," Ben replied calmly. It's about what we are legally obligated to do with this evidence. We have a recording of your client admitting to multiple felonies. We could end this conversation right now, and I could be sitting in the U.S. Attorney's office in 30 minutes. Genevieve's face was a stony mask. Every man has his price, Ben. Name it. And so Ben laid out their terms. They were not negotiable. First, Nina Petrova's settlement. It was not for $25,000. Ben demanded a sum that would not only cover Leo's medical treatments for the rest of his life, but would also set Nina up with a trust fund that would allow her to finish law school and start her own life without the burden of debt. The number he named made Genevieve physically flinch. Second, a public apology from Aurelian Drakov. Not to the press, but to Nina directly. He had to face her and acknowledge what he did. Third, a separate anonymous multi-million-dollar donation to a legal aid fund for unlawfully terminated employees. This was Nina's addition. Fourth, and most importantly, Drakov Capital would have to unwind the Innovatech deal. They would be forced to sell the company back to a consortium of its original employees, led by the former CEO at the pre-takeover price. Drakov would take a staggering financial loss, a public humiliation, far worse than any monetary penalty. Genevieve listened, her expression grim. When he was finished, she simply nodded. I'll have to speak with my client. The final confrontation took place a week later in the same hotel conference room. Nina was there with Ben. Aurelian Drakov was there with Genevieve. He looked smaller in person, stripped of his entourage and the opulent backdrop of his favorite restaurant. His face was pale, his eyes filled with a quiet, simmering rage. He looked at Nina as if she were a particularly disgusting insect he had found in his soup. As per the terms, he stood. He cleared his throat. Ms. Petrova. He began the words tasting like acid in his mouth. My behavior at La Perle Noire was inappropriate. I offer my apology for the distress my actions caused. He couldn't bring himself to look her in the eye. He was reading from a script. Nina stood up, and for the first time, Drakov was forced to look at her. She was not wearing a waitress uniform. She was wearing a sharp, dark suit, the one Ben had bought for her. She was no longer the help. She was his adversary, his conqueror. You know, Mr. Drakov, she said, her voice steady and clear. The worst thing you did that night wasn't firing me. It wasn't even the finger snapping. The worst thing you did was laugh. You laughed about ruining people's lives, about a man who wept because you destroyed everything he had built. You told me to learn my place. I have. My place is ensuring that men like you learn that everyone, every single person, from the CEO to the person who pours your water, has a right to dignity. That's a lesson you can't learn from a balance sheet. Aurelian Drakov said nothing. He simply stared, his empire crumbling around him, brought down by a woman he hadn't even considered human enough to address by name. The settlement was signed. The funds were transferred. Frank Gerard, having cooperated, sold La Perle Noire and retired quietly. The Innovatech employees got their company back, and Aurelian Drakov, though he avoided prison, was disgraced. The SEC investigation, fueled by anonymous tips, would hound him for years, crippling his ability to do business. Months later, Nina sat with Leo in the waiting room of the top specialist in the country. The treatment was working. The $10,000 deposit that had once seemed like an impossible mountain was now a forgotten pebble. She had just finished her final exams, graduating at the top of her class. A job offer from Carter Shaw and Associates sat on her kitchen table. She had learned her place, all right. Her place was in the light. The story of Nina Petrova and Aurelian Drakov is a powerful reminder that justice isn't always found in the grand halls of power, but sometimes in the quiet defiance of a single individual who refuses to be invisible. It shows that integrity and courage can be weapons far more potent than wealth and influence. In a world where the powerful often seem to operate by a different set of rules, Nina's story proves that no one is untouchable, and that a single voice speaking the truth can be enough to shake the foundations of an empire. If you were inspired by Nina's fight for dignity and justice, please give this video a like to show your support. Share this story with someone who needs a reminder that the little guy can win. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell for more incredible true-life stories of triumph against the odds. Thank you for listening.